Hello everyone, and welcome to this new video about Golang, and today we're going to look at for loops and in general loops in Golang. Well, why did I say for loops? That's because in Golang there's actually no other loops other than for. So there's no while loops, there's no do while loops if you come from other languages. You might be familiar with these concepts, but here in Golang there's just a for loop and you use it to do all loops. So we will start by looking at the classical for loop. So first of all, what is a loop? In programming languages, a loop is just a bunch of code that you repeat over and over again until, for example, a certain condition is met. So to initialize a for loop, the syntax is the following. You say for, then we have, actually let's put it in a comment. So the syntax for a for loop is for, then we have what is known as an initialization condition. This is basically what is done when we start the loop. Then we have a condition that each time gets checked. And notice these statements are separated by a semicolon. So we have a condition that each time is checked in order for the loop to be run. So if the condition is satisfied, then we run the loop again. And there's a post condition, which is a bunch of code that is run every time that basically the condition is checked and we run the loop. Then we open some curly braces, and inside these curly braces we put the actual code, in this case code, and then we put all the code that we want. So this is how we use and initialize a for loop. An example of this could be the following. So suppose that we want to print all numbers from 1 to 10. So of course we could do just fourteenth print line 1 and then fourteenth print line 2 and so on. But notice how basically how time consuming first of all this is to write manually this code, and also how untidy it will look at in the end. And also notice how not scalable this is. So suppose you now want to print 50 numbers, 1 up to 50, you have to write other 40 times print ln for the other values. Whereas let's now look how we can do that with for loops. So we will start by saying for, then the initialization condition, this will be run once when we start the loop. So we will initialize a variable I to 0. And also initialize and declare. Remember that we said we want to print all numbers up to 10. So the condition will be that I has to be less than 10. And then each time that this condition is met, we increment I by 1. And then inside of here, so this is the code that is run every time this loop is executed, we print I. Let's see what happens. As you can see, we get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 9. Actually, if you want to include 10, because before we wanted to, in the original problem that we had, we wanted also 10 inside. We will put 1 here instead of 0, and let's see what we get. 1 up to 10, as you can see. And so this is how you use for loops. You can also have nested for loops. So now let's delete this and let's think of a problem for which we want to use a nested for loop. So for example, consider the following problem. Print out all the elements of the set, for example, 1, 2, 3, Cartesian product with 1, 2, 3. So you want to print all ordered couples, for example, 1, 2, then 1, 3, then 2, 1, 2, 1, then 2, 3. So how can we do that? We will use 2 for loops. So we will first use a for loop starting from 1, going up to 4, and each time we increment it. And then we will use another for loop inside with the same values, but for another variable j. And then we will print out to the console from print line. Actually, let's use printf. We will print out the following. So we want to print it as a tuple notation. We could say a couple of elements. And then in here we will put I and j. So let's see what we get. As you can see, we get 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. So we got what we wanted. So now we see how we can use for loops, and these are basically just, if you come from other languages, the classical for loops that you also find, for example, in JavaScript, in Python, in Java, in C, and so on. But here in Golang, we will have to use for loops also to do what are known as while loops. But let's now suppose that we want to run something until something is true. So for example, let's set a variable, maybe, well, I don't know, like variable var AB is equal to 25. And so suppose that we might want to run a condition, so something until AB is greater than 20. And so for example, we could print out variable is greater than 20. So now what we will get from this is an infinite loop. In fact, we can try and run this. As you can see, we get an infinite loop. So in order to make this loop not infinite, we might try, for example, and decrement the value at each iteration like this. And also notice that in Golang, just like in many other languages, use plus plus to increment the value and minus minus to decrement it. So in this case, we're decrementing it. And so let's try again and run it. As you can see, we get only 5 messages printed out to the console, because let's see what this for loop actually does. It first checks the value. So the value of the variable is initialized to be 25. Then here the loop checks if it's greater than 20. Well, 25 is greater than 20. So it runs this, it prints this out, and then decrements it. And 25 becomes 24. Then it runs this again. So AB, which is 24 now, is greater than 20. So it runs this again. And then AB becomes 23 because it gets decremented again. And so this proceeds on and on and on until it gets 21. 21 is greater than 20. This gets printed out. 21 minus 1 is 20. And so we get the last iteration, which is when AB becomes 20. Then AB becomes 20, but 20 is not greater than 20. And so basically the for loop finishes. And then it proceeds with the execution of the program. So for example, if there was other code here, it would have been executed. We can try and make an example. So for example here, other code. As you can see, when you finish a for loop, then the program just keeps running, executing the code afterwards. And so this is how you work with for loops in Golang. And you can also make infinite loops. So without specifying condition, like this, you can just show for. And then here you can just inside for example, the code you want to print out. So for example, let's say for, and we will say here infinite loop. Let's see what we get. As you can see, we get an infinite loop. This is very useful, for example, if you want to make some terminal-based programs where you want to rely on user input and you want to basically have an event loop, for example, for your mini terminal game or whatever. And so this is how you initialize an infinite loop without being based on a condition. And lastly, we will now see how loops can also be used to access values of a slice or of an array. Let's consider the case of a slice. So let's initialize a slice equal to, for example, a slice of integers. Actually, let's put it equal to a slice of strings. Value 1, then value 2, and then value 3, for example. So 3 is strings. So now we can use a for loop to iterate through the slice. So one way in which we could do that is, for example, to say I initialize it to 0. Let's say I less than the length of the slice, then I plus plus, and then we could just print out the console the element at the index I of the slice. And so we get all the elements, as you can see, value 1, value 2, value 3. But another way to do this, and this is maybe faster to write, is to use the for range loop. So how can we do that? We will say for, then here we need to specify 2 elements. That is the key value pair, so key and value. And then we will use the colon equal range, and then we will specify the slice inside of which we want to loop over. And then let's try to print this out. Let's see what we get. As you can see, we get out the same thing because we get the values. But this time we also had the keys, and the key is just the index to which you can find the specified element. And so this is also another way of looping through through a slice using a for loop. So you might also want to print out just the elements, or maybe just the keys of a slice. By keys, of course, we mean the indexes. So if that is the case, then you can just substitute the value that you do not want, and maybe you remember because we did it also in the earlier lectures, with this underscore. Because of course, if you try to just take it regardless and then don't use it, then the Go compiler will throw an error. So in order to discard, maybe in this case the key, maybe we just want to print out the values of the slice, we can just do as follows. So put an underscore in place of the k, we will just get the values printed out. So with this said, I think we have now said enough about for loops, and in the next video we will start looking at another very important concept in Golang, that of functions.